Hello, in this technical assistance recording, we're going to review indirect costs. Indirect costs are general agency expenses that are very difficult to assign with any accuracy to a small number of people or to a specific program, but that are necessary to the general operation of the program. Typically, indirect costs refer to things like administrative expenses, such as utilities and office space, and can include the salaries of executive staff. You have 4 options for indirect costs under authority agreements. If your agency has a federally approved indirect cost rate, you may charge that rate to the agreement. You may negotiate a state indirect cost rate. You may charge the DeMinimis rate of 10%, or you can elect to not charge any indirect costs at all. Applicants that budget indirect costs based on a federally approved rate must provide a letter from their federal cognizant agency that documents that rate, and they must provide a current letter. Now, we're not asking you to submit the letter with your application. If your agency is selected for funding through the NOFO, your grant monitor will request that letter during the negotiation phase. Now, the state has set up a process to negotiate indirect cost rates. So when you sign on to the GATA portal and you complete your grantee registration, pre-qualification, and the ICQ, the Fiscal and Administrative Risk Assessment, you will automatically receive an invitation through the system from the accounting firm of Crowe-Horwath. Crowe-Horwath has been hired by the state to negotiate indirect costs on its behalf. You can elect to not negotiate that rate, but you're going to get that message anyways when you work in the GATA portal. You may also elect to use the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate, so it's not a negotiated rate. But de minimis is not available to agencies that have a current negotiated indirect cost rate, either through the state or a federal cognizant agency. And de minimis is not available to agencies that have ever had a negotiated indirect cost rate. So it's not like you can stop using the rate that you had from the state or from the Department of Justice and elect to just go with the de minimis. If you've ever had a negotiated rate, the de minimis is not available to you. Now, grantees that do elect to charge the 10% de minimis rate to the budget need to detail the calculation of their modified total direct cost in the budget narrative. MTDC can include all salaries and wages, applicable fringe benefits, materials and supplies, travel, and only the first $25,000 of each subcontract. MTDC excludes rental costs, including office space and equipment purchases, and remember, equipment are items that have a unit cost of $5,000 or more. Any capital expenditures would be excluded from MTDC, participant support costs, and that portion of each subcontract, which is in excess of $25,000. Obviously, this isn't an exhaustive list of everything that's excluded. These are the most common exclusions from authority-type grants. But if you want to see the exhaustive list, here's the citation where you can look that up. Let's go through a little exercise to calculate a de minimis rate. This exercise would be applicable for any rate that you're going to use. So here is our budget categories. We've got $40,000 in personnel, $10,000 in fringe benefits, $400 in travel, equipment, supplies. We have 2 subcontracts under this agreement, one for $30,000, one for $40,000, for total costs of, without our indirect, of $126,000. But not all of these costs are MTDC eligible. Personnel is, fringe benefits are, the travel costs are eligible, but equipment is not. So that $5,000 piece of equipment that you're going to charge to this agreement has to be excluded from your MTDC calculation. Your supplies are good. They make it into MTDC. and only the first $25,000 of this $30,000 contract, and only the first $25,000 of that $40,000 contract. So the change, the $5,000 and the $15,000 that exceed that $25,000 threshold for each of those contracts, is excluded. So you see that I've totaled up all of our eligible costs. They total $101,000, and I'm going to calculate, so that's my MTDC. So I'm going to calculate my de minimis indirect cost rate as 10% of that $101,000. I'm going to add that onto my total cost without indirect, and I'm going to get a total cost for this agreement of $136,100. As we said, if you are charging the de minimis rate, I would want to see some calculation like this. It doesn't have to be a table, obviously. On the indirect cost tab in the budget, in that program narrative, I'd want you to say, you know, my personnel costs are $40,000, fringe benefits are $10,000, here's travel, my supplies are $600, and, you know, $50,000 of the contractual line item. That gives me my total cost of the $101,000. That's my MTDC, and make note that you are excluding this $5,000, this $15,000, and that $5,000 of equipment. And that should satisfy the explanation of your MTDC.